Hello and welcome to today's video. Today's video is the fourth in a series on composition tips. This video is about the rule of thirds. How many of you have heard of the rule of thirds? Anybody? Anybody? Someone there in the back? No, they haven't heard of it. Well, I'm glad you're here then, because we're going to discuss rule of thirds, why it's cool, how it works, what it is, and then we'll take a look at some photos that I've taken as part of an assignment around rule of thirds, and then give you an assignment to go to create some photos as well. So let's get started with talking about rule of thirds. Now, if you've ever had an art class, a drawing class, art history, a graphic design class, a photography class, you've probably heard of rule of thirds. And it gets talked about a lot. It's probably the most famous of the composition ingredients, elements. And it's a big deal in a way, but also maybe not. I prefer to call it the suggestion of thirds. And I'll talk about why with that a little bit later in the video. So first, what is the rule of thirds? The rule of thirds divides your frame, whatever you're looking at, into 9 squares, or not squares, 9 areas that are of equal size. And that gives you 3 areas vertically and 3 areas horizontally in which to organize your content. So if you're using the rule of thirds, you're using those grid lines, either the vertical ones or the horizontal ones, to position the main element or elements in your composition. So I would try, if I'm going, I have to look at my monitor off to the side. So this is now, I'm aligned on the left third, the left top third. If I go the other way, I'm on the right third, right? Let's see, right there, right third, okay? Right top third. So if you want to kind of get to the ultimate use of rule of thirds, what you do is you get those intersection points, those 4 intersections, and that's where you would place the main point of emphasis in the photo. You would align things there. So that's how rule of thirds works. So why is the rule of thirds talked about so much? Why is it such a big deal? Well, the reason it's a big deal is because it works, mostly. Rule of thirds works. The best reason I can give you for the reason it works is because it kind of scratches an itch in our brain that likes the way it organizes things. We like, our human brains tends to like things in threes. There's just something pleasing aesthetically about that. I don't know all the psychological reasons for it. I'm sure there are many, but that's my understanding. And that's my personal experience too. I just tend to like things in threes. So one thing to be aware of with rule of thirds is, of the composition techniques, it's one of the weaker ones in a way, in that if you just use rule of thirds with your subject, it often isn't enough to still create an interesting photo. So you may need to combine rule of thirds with one of the other composition techniques, like getting closer or using an interesting perspective or point of view. So be aware of that. Rule of thirds has a lot of power, but it's not enough often by itself, especially if your subject isn't super interesting or if the light isn't very interesting. All right, so let's take a look at some examples of photos that are composed using the rule of thirds grids. So this is going to be aligned on the left vertical third, with maybe the main content in the middle still, but it's on the left third. This one is aligned on the right. And one of the cool things you can do in your camera is turn on this grid in your viewfinder or on your screen to help you align things. Now, I personally don't use that. I find I get a little too rigid, and it's also a little distracting for me. So I leave it turned off, and then I can approximate rule of thirds alignment in my viewfinder and in my composition. And then if I missed by a little bit, I can always crop in software to get me exactly to the third. In landscape photos, often the grid line you use will be the horizontal one to align the horizon. So this photo aligns the horizon on the lower third. And when you're looking at landscapes and trying to decide which to use, upper or lower third, the rule of thumb I use is I'll align it on the lower third if the things above the horizon, in this case Mount Rainier, are more interesting, or the sky. And I'll align it on the upper third if whatever's in the foreground below the horizon is more interesting. So whatever the interesting point is, there you go. This one also kind of has that boat aligned on the third, so there's multiple thirds often in photos that might be involved. This photo with the moon aligned on the right, lower right third, again at one of those intersection points. So if you can get one of those intersection points, those are kind of like rainbows and when magical things happen sometimes. So at least theoretically. And again here, this last example photo with the Blue Angels and their crew right before takeoff, engine startup. And this crew member is running, and I've aligned him on the third. So he's got lots of room to move into the photo. So that is some examples of how rule of third alignment is used. So since I approach photography from an artistic perspective, rule of thirds can sometimes become too restricting. So that's why I call it a suggestion of thirds. It's a place to start. It's certainly something you can try. If you're not sure which of the thirds to use, take 9 photos where the elements are arranged in each of those quadrants, but use it as a starting point and not something you have to follow. I am currently in a place where I am tending to enjoy symmetry in my photos, center alignments, and symmetry. It's a composition tool I'm preferring these days. So as you're journeying in your photography, I hope you will find that there will be different time spans where you're using different styles, different techniques. You're growing, you're changing. So that's part of the journey. Again, rule of thirds is a great tool to use. It can be super helpful, but oftentimes if you just only use that, your photos tend to look all the same, which is not necessarily what we want, but sometimes it's fun. So in these videos, I kind of give a little assignment to create some photos along with this as a framework to use in growing in your photography skills. So the assignments are, use rule of thirds. So maybe turn on the grid lines in your camera so you can see that through your viewfinder or the screen. And then go around and take some photos for a week or so, and use rule of thirds as your guiding principle in creating the photos. I've just completed my version of this assignment, and I thought I would share some of those photos with you. So here we go. So I wanted to start in the sharing of the photos with this photo. And this is a great example of how if you just use rule of thirds and don't pay attention to the end photo, rule of thirds isn't often enough. So this photo, this first one, the camera is down low, the sun is behind, so there's minimal distractions, there's a sense of layers here, and the main elements of the photo are aligned on the right third. Now, if I just took this photo from normal standing height without really paying attention to light direction or overall interest in the photo, this is what you get. It's the same subject 30 seconds after that first photo, but look at how much less interesting this photo is. It's hard to see the subject. The light is not as interesting because it's not doing anything except exposing the subject. And there's lots of distractions in the background on the ground. So back here in this photo, all those distractions disappear because they're not visible. They're hidden behind that little foreground element. And then the background is just other green, out of focus things because the camera is down low. So rule of thirds isn't just enough often by itself to create an interesting photo. So let's go take a look at some other photos. I'll include the exposure information here because folks tend to like that. Spider web aligned on the left third with some sun behind it. some light behind it. It's not the sun, it's some reflections actually. Here we go with a pine cone down low. Again, this is just sitting on the ground, and so is the camera. If I take this from normal standing height, just looking down at it, it's not as interesting. One thing I suggest doing in compositions when you can, if you want to bring more interest to your whatever your subject is to imagine your subject has eyes and to try and place your camera position at your subject's eye level. That creates interest and creates engagement, creates a sense of potential connection to the subject that's missing if you're above it or below it or not at eye level. So I'm at the pine cone's eye level. I'm at the fire hydrant's eye level. This fire hydrant was nicely arranged for me, also already kind of in a rule of thirds alignment. It's not centered between these two trees. It's off to this one side, so I just embrace that in my composition. Again, there's something I mean, even it's an ordinary thing. It's an ordinary object we see all the time, but photos of this can look different because of the composition and exclusion of some things and inclusion of just certain elements. So there you have it, a conversation about the composition element called rule of thirds. Some ideas of how to use it to create more interesting photos, a little bit of awareness of some of its limitations and how it can be stronger when often combined with other composition elements like getting closer and using a more interesting camera perspective. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any suggestions, tips, comments, please leave them down below in that place for comments. As a YouTube content creator, you know I am required to request that you subscribe to this video, and also that you might even gently nudge that like button so that you can train the YouTube algorithm a little bit more about what you prefer in videos. I appreciate it. Thank you. It's super helpful to me and to YouTube as well, believe it or not. So thank you for that. If you have comments, suggestions for future video topics, I'd be glad to receive those also in the comment below. I have 2 more videos planned in this composition series, and if you've missed the other ones, here's a link to the playlist. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I hope you have a great week ahead. You get to take lots of fun photos and interesting photos. And stay safe, stay well, and I will see you next time.